to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. It is Thursday, which means it is, what's it called? It is, Moon Knight discussion day. The day in which we gather to discuss yesterday's episode of Moon Knight. Now, yesterday's episode of Moon Knight was, what's it called? Yesterday's episode of Moon Knight was, I believe it's the second to last episode, but I know for a fact it was the first episode that I have not seen, and I'm seeing in real time with everyone else. Because I saw, what's it called, early. I did see the first 4 early. So, yeah. So here we go to talk about this 5th episode. Now, episode 5 is pretty interesting. It is a backstory exposition episode. Now, I seem to recall, and I could be wrong on this. There is a chance that I'm wrong on this. I seem to recall this season's only 6 episodes. So they have a lot of ground to cover in the last episode, and I think that could be a problem. Like, if they have to cover a ton of ground in this last episode that's coming up next week, they're not going... I don't think they'll be able to do it, if I'm being perfectly honest. Because this episode, you know, what it does is great, and what it does is really interesting and fun, and we'll get into that in a little bit, but it doesn't exactly move the plot forward in any meaningful way. In terms of getting from point A, which is the first episode, to point B, which is the finale, even if we go point A to point B on a smaller scale, where point A is him getting shot, and point B is him getting up from getting shot, there is a kind of set series of events that one would expect to happen along that chain. We would expect for Layla to free Khonshu, and then Khonshu getting freed would give Mark his healing factor back, and then Mark would be able to heal and get up and go and do his thing and go and fight Arthur Harrow. But the problem is here, we don't get we're no closer to that aspect of it. By the end of the episode, Mark is, okay, we need to get a message to Layla so that way she can do X, Y, and Z. But we are no closer to that actually happening, which is an important aspect of the story, because if Mark is shot, and we need to de-shot Mark, so that way he can go and fight Arthur and Amit, or or how the fuck you pronounce it, that's an important step. It's cool we got this exposition, and we got this, explanation as to who, what, and why, Mark Spector is who he is, but I think it would be, this show would have been better suited doing a little bit of a hybrid episode, one that does both exposits where we are, explains where we are, and moves us towards, getting him out of this hole. I mean, there could be 7 episodes. I could be completely wrong, and there could be 7 episodes, which this would be null and void if there are 7 episodes. But and a smart person would have looked that up before starting this recording. But I didn't, and here we are. So, if there are only 6 episodes and there's only 1 episode left, then I think we're in a little bit of a packed finale. If there are 2 episodes left, it could be, I think it is 7. I seem to recall it being a weird number and being like, that's fucking weird, why would they do that? Because it's like, they do 7, and then it's like, yeah, that makes sense, actually, that it would be 7 and not 6. So, looking at this show, we'll say for argument's sake that it's 7. That would mean the next episode would be almost entirely Layla dependent, on Layla freeing Khonshu after she gets a message from the Egyptian underworld, explaining that, hey, Mark needs you to go and free Khonshu, and then Khonshu will rebond with Mark's body, and it'll heal him, and he'll be able to come back and fight. But the idea of that, and it's like, the whole episode's kind of cool, because the premise of the episode is Mark and Steven are now dead, and they are headed. They have to balance the scales before they go to before they go to the underworld of Egypt. And I think that the other thing this episode does kind of subtly is set up why Arthur is wrong, in a more concrete way, because it's very easy to dismiss someone with this moral quandary as killing babies, as has been done on this show. I think that was the thing that Mark said. It's like, oh, so you're going to kill babies? And he's like, well, no. But this kind of quandary is very easy to explain, to hand wave away with something like that, where if you take the moral question, push it to the absolute end of the slippery slope, and then you're like, see, this is what it is, it's very easy to dismiss it as nonsense. Herein lies the problem. And I think the thing that this show does is, in this episode, they show why what he's doing is wrong. And it is, I cannot do I cannot, if Harrow is, passing on Amit's judgment, Amit's judgment, and is doing it that way, then the problem becomes that she is, these souls are coming to, the underworld, not ready to go to the underworld. They're going too soon, and they're being damned too soon. And then when we go through what the whole thing is, because Mark Spector is not a good person, and this episode kind of solidifies that, but he still is able to balance his scales and move on to the next life in the Field of Reeds, which, by the way, when we're seeing him in the Field of Reeds, number one, it reminds me of Thanos at the end of Endgame, which I haven't seen that comparison drawn yet. But it also reminds me of, what's it called? Then it also reminds me of the fact that the Egyptian underworld just seems very fucking boring. Like, oh, you gotta hang out in this Field of Reeds where there's nothing around. There's not even other people. You're just kind of hanging out. Like, that seems more like hell to me than a form of heaven. Like, if it were up to me, I'd rather just be turned to stone for eternity. Because it's like, if I'm turned to stone for eternity, then what the fuck am I doing anyway? Like, at least if you turn to stone, you're like, well, I'm in hell, this is supposed to be shitty. But, if you're in heaven and you're hanging out in this Field of Reeds and nothing's going on, there's no other people around, it's like, well, this is the good outcome. I just want to make sure we're on the same page about that. This is the good outcome that I got here. What was the bad outcome? But the thing is that's important to note about this whole thing is when he goes through the whole, the whole act of the episode is about him weighing the scales. Because for those who don't know Egyptian, Egyptian mythology, when they do the weighing of the heart against the feather, if your heart is heavier than the feather, you don't get into the Field of Reeds. If your heart is lighter than the feather, then you do, if I remember correctly. It's like the feather of truth. The feather knows everything you've done, and this is how they weigh to see if you're a good person or not. And it's an interesting system. Don't get me wrong. I'm not against. Just get around me, motherfucker. I'm not for or against scales and feathers being used to decide who goes to hell and who stays. It's certainly not any more or less weird than a guy standing at the door of heaven who's like, you did good, get in here. Because at least it seems like you can't really negotiate with the Feather, because it's a Feather. Like, you could probably try to negotiate with St. Peter at the gates of heaven, but it probably won't work. But either way, talking about like how it works, they're given the opportunity to write it and to become that right person. And in a way, it is kind of mirroring the Christian belief that, you know, the deathbed confession to the priest will still get you into heaven. Where it's like, even if it is the last possible second, you going and genuinely repenting for your sins, you can get by. But the idea that, you know, Mark being a part of who he is, we see the birth of Stephen in this episode, where Stephen comes from as a person, and it's a really interesting kind of way of showing what happens in his life, is this idea of him having to go through his memories and become at peace with them so that he can move on to the next life. And I feel like it feels silly to me that they spent all this time teasing Jake Lockley, unless this is the true end of Stephen Grant and Jake is just also there, and Jake is gonna, like, because the thing is now, if this is understood the way it is, I feel like we have a fundamental problem here. He's gonna have to rescue Stephen, and then once Stephen is rescued, Stephen can rejoin him and the two can go back into the body. The problem is, you know, what about Jake? We know Jake is there because there have been times where where Mark goes to Stephen, and Stephen wakes up and Mark goes to him like, "Oh my God, Stephen, what did you do?" And Stephen's like, "I don't know, that wasn't me." And it's like, well, obviously that's Jake. And then there was also the third sarcophagus in the last episode, where it's like, okay, so there definitely is a third personality that needs to be addressed. So it's things like that where it's like we're running into kind of pitfalls that people are going to point to now and be like, oh, that's a plot hole, but it's not a plot hole yet. It's like a plot crack that, like, if it doesn't get treated before the winter, will become a plot hole. But it's not there yet. It's not taking out someone's axle or, you know, anything like that. It's, you know, it is a prelude to a plot hole. How about that? So it is an interesting kind of question that they're posing, you know, with this. And I think that the idea that all of that being shown and then him getting the chance to write himself before going to the Field of Reeds, I don't think that necessarily they're saying that you can kill people. Like, I don't think that's the moral stance Marvel is taking, that you can kill people, but if they're bad people, you can still go to heaven, because that feels like a weird moral stance. Because, like, it's like Frank Castle is not a good person. And if there ever is someone who's going to sit at the right hand of Satan, it's going to be Frank Castle. Or Mephisto, like we're talking about Marvel. But either way, like, if that's the case, and like, I think that what they're saying is it's him coming to terms with what he did and being at peace with it, and not rejecting anything he did. Because that was the big thing, is he had to put it all out there on Front Street and not be ashamed of anything. So, like, a big part of the episode is, you know, his brother dies, quote unquote. I don't think the brother's actually dead. I think that that's going to be a big thing for a possible season 2. The Bucky Barnes is Captain America, if you will, because in the comics, his brother is Shadow Knight, who is one of his enemies. And I think that that's, you know, something that could come back and be a thing that happens next season if it comes back for season 2. And I like this idea that this could possibly be going in that direction, but we see the brother, you know, what's it called? We see the brother go into the water, You know, we see them go into the thing, and then we're at the Shiva, and it's like, well, we don't have a body. And if there's one rule in most of science fiction, if not all of science fiction, but definitely within Marvel, if there is no body, they are not dead. And it's also worth noting that in Marvel, even if there is a body, they may not be dead. I think there have been like 7 lasting deaths over 10 years, if that, in Marvel. Because it's like, who's actually stayed dead? Like, we can't even say Vision has stayed dead at this point, because Vision came back. Heimdall might have stayed dead. The original Gamora, but we have a new Gamora. Well, I think that's the same thing with Vision, where it's like the original Gamora, and there's a new Gamora. The original Vision is a new Vision. And then there's also, you know, Black Widow and Tony Stark. And Freya. But I think that's really it. I think everyone else is kind of just, you know, died and come back, if they've died at all. And it's that kind of thing where it's like, well, if we don't have a body, he's probably going to come back, and we're probably going to get Shadow Knight. I mean, there were some references to Bushman, and that could be, you know, cool to explore in the future. I don't think that's necessarily a priority in the present time. I think that they're, you know, it's cool that we're getting some other Moon Knight, you know, references in this show. I'm interested to see where they go from here. I just don't know. I feel like the path to go from here is pretty laid out. So unless it's done very well, it's not going to be interesting. And the issue is, it's like Oscar Isaac is having a blast. You can tell that he's really having fun with this, and being able to play both roles and doing it differently for each. And a lot of this episode is him acting off of himself. And he's terrific in it. Ethan Hawke is also doing a great job. He's great in this episode as, you know, Dr. Harrow, the Arthur Harrow in the mental asylum that's not real. And it is one of those things where it's like the way he's playing it is so funny, and it's just like, you know, where he's playing it so straight, and it's really interesting. I like the show. I think it is one of the strongest, if not, I would say it's probably the second strong. I think Falcon and the Winter Soldier is probably the strongest of the shows. I would say this is the second place. But yeah, I think this is a very interesting episode, and I think too, getting to see the moment of, like, that kid who plays Mark, before his personality splits, that kid playing Mark is a great actor. I know we sit here and we talk about Oscar Isaac a lot, because Oscar Isaac is the lead, and he is the first one we see, and, you know, all of that. But this kid is doing so much with the little screen time he has, and he's doing a great job with it. I think that the biggest thing to go with is, you know, like, looking at all that happens, all that's going on in this show. It is little things like that really make it work, and it's the fact that even this kid can do the split between Steven and Mark, where it's not just it's not just the voice. It's like tics and mannerisms too that are changing. And it's the fact that this kid can do it just as well as Oscar Isaac is tremendous, and he does a great job in the episode too. I don't think that he's getting enough praise for his role, from what I've seen. So we'll wrap up there for today. Either today or tomorrow we will have a a sum up of CinemaCon, which is currently ongoing at in Vegas. Maybe next year we'll be doing some on the ground reporting. If I can remember, I'll write it down and see if I can request a press pass. But who knows? So this week we have there's a new episode of The Flash tonight, so that'll be fun. Then what's it called? What's after The Flash? Also tonight there is that new show from... See, I think this is the problem with CW Seed being 24 hours late, is that now it's going to fuck me for the rest of the season. Because now we also have that Andrew Garfield, In the Name of God, Hulu true crime show, which is helpful because I always notice a boost of viewership, of listenership around the time these true crime shows come out. So if you're wondering why I keep covering those, there's your answer. As always, you can subscribe and give us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts. That would be very helpful. And we'll be back with more stuff later this week as it happens. So until then, have a great rest of your week.